Chapter 8. Location: Southern Utah. Date: June 19th. Jarren, Calavan. I can't do it. Jarren wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The frustration in him boiled with heat that rivaled the sweltering temperatures of the desert. It's not working. I don't understand. Selena had worked with him for the last 2 days. When Ellie healed his mind, Jarren had felt like he'd taken a breath of fresh air. After being buried in a coffin, he'd only been able to access this part of him for a short time, but Selena treated him like he was incapable of things a toddler should be able to do. This is a basic ability of all descendants of Samuel. You're an elemental descendant. We can travel through the ground the way water does. The soil absorbs us and moves us through the earth as we will it. They stood at the bottom of a deep washout where flash floods had torn the earth away and left a deep crevice. The sun was directly overhead. The shade of the walls they had enjoyed through the morning was gone, and the sun seemed to be mocking him right along with Selena. Jarren took a deep breath, shook his shoulders, and placed his hand against the sandy side of the dry riverbed. Nothing happened. Let me show you one more time. Selena walked straight into the steep bank of rugged earth that seemed to welcome her home. The ground didn't open up for her or make a tunnel. Selena became part of the ground, absorbing into it the way she had described, like a puddle of water soaking into the soil. Her face appeared directly in front of him, coming out of the wall like a floating head. Jarren jumped back, unnerved at her nearness. See? It's simple. Even the youngest of elementals can ground travel. I don't understand, he said. He took another step back, so he had some space between him and Selena and the ground that mocked him. Are there a lot of us? Are our descendants traveling through the ground beneath my feet all the time? Selena's face, still grainy like the sand she moved through, fell, the smile dropping away like bits of a sandcastle pulled at by the tide. There are not many of us anymore. Not since the massacre. What happened? Jarren asked. I've never learned any kind of history. I don't even understand what we can do. Selena pulled into the bank of earth, barely hovering in view in the cracks and crevices of the sandy cliff. The image of her face swayed back and forth. 100 years ago, the descendants were slaughtered. Only 20 descendants escaped and went into hiding. There are not hundreds of us roaming through the ground. There are only the descendants who hide at the Vale, the descendants who left the Vale, and the descendants who are born to ordinaries, coming into their knowledge and power on their own. It doesn't happen often, but there have been a couple dozen over the last 100 years. I was one of them. And we can all do the same things? He asked. No. Roots moved through the ground like extensions of Selena's hair, making the impression of her shaking her head. There are basic abilities. Elementals can ground travel, light descendants can see great distances, and those with the knowledge of life can heal. Valde Novo divided the knowledge into 3, so that no one person would have the power of creation. But once the angels decided to have children, the knowledge was divided more and more as the DNA was split and diluted over the generations. What a descendant can do depends on their own intelligence, the pieces of angel DNA passed down to them, and their own determination to develop the knowledge and energy they've inherited. You said there was a massacre, Jarren said. His toes curled into the ground at his feet, the warm sand comforting him, even though his soul had gone cold. Thousands killed. He thought of his dad, dying in front of his eyes, the light going out like something powerful being snuffed out for good. Yes, Selena said. One of the leaders of the Triune decided to try and gather all of the knowledge of Valde Novo together in one place to be able to recreate Valde Novo's power. He tricked the descendants into coming together, uniting their powers and knowledge in a show of celebration. He had it planned too well. He trapped them in a room of hematite, wrapping their necks with hematite cords that pulled the energy from their bodies, and then he destroyed their compasses. A demon horde attacked the guardians, and one by one, each compass was broken, each descendant's light went out, and each guardian's soul was torn from their bodies in sorrow. No guardian can survive the loss of the connection with their descendant. Wow, Jarren said. Selena had told the story with so much emotion, he had to resist the urge to reach out and press his hand against the sand wall. He found himself wanting to comfort her. There aren't a lot of us left, then? The Triune continue to hunt us. If they gather enough descendants, they will have the full knowledge and energy of creation. And then what? Adura foresaw that they will use it to open the edge of eternity, the gateway back to Valde Novo's realm. If that door opens, the energy will kill all life on the earth. The Triune killed my dad. How is that going to help them open this stupid gateway? I don't know. Selena emerged more from the sand, her fingers playing with the roots like tangled hair. They've been taking Unguarded because they haven't chosen a guardian yet. They cannot be killed until they've bonded, a weakness the original angels hadn't anticipated. And what are we doing about it? Jarren asked. Are we just waiting around until the Triune gets their hands on enough Unguarded to destroy the world? There are two trains of thought, Selena said. Stay protected in the veil. If all of the descendants are safe, then Cato-Filius cannot get their energy. There are others who left the veil to fight, to protect ordinaries and Unguarded. But there were only 4 who left the veil with their guardians. I once believed in their cause. But now? Selena trailed off, and her head solidified as she pushed her face toward him. I will help you ground travel, and then I will go to find some answers. It was too much to take in. So many pieces that Jarren couldn't fit together in his mind, but he recognized the determination on Selena's face. He would take what he could get before she left. Okay. He shifted his feet and waved his hand at Selena. Move out of the way. I saw what you did. He closed his eyes and balanced on the balls of his feet. He shifted back and forth, shaking out his arms and loosening up. He chanted his motivational line from Top Gun, the one he used to pump himself up before a football game. And I feel the need for speed. He did feel the need. He needed a win. He'd played enough sports to recognize when an athlete was getting in their own head. He was letting his doubts get to him, but he wanted to believe he was stronger than that. His dad had never shown weakness, never doubted himself, not until the very end. Selena's head came farther out of the wall, shooting toward him until her whole head and upper shoulders had their own form and color again. Did you just quote a movie that was made before you were born? I've always been obsessed with the 80s. Jarren smiled as her eyebrows drew down. Why? Selena asked. A cold feeling stole over Jarren, almost like the sun had lost its ability to give off heat. A memory flashed into his mind, and he started speaking before he decided if he really wanted to share the information with Selena. I used to ask Xander about you. A lot. He swallowed. I wanted to know about you, since you gave birth to me and all. My dad didn't seem to want me around, so I thought about running away, trying to find you. Selena pulled back into the wall, but didn't disappear. The stones shifted around her in a way that made it feel like the earth itself was uncomfortable. You asked about me? What did he say? He ignored the desperation behind her curiosity. It was all too familiar. Too painful. Nothing. For over a year, I would ask him every time I could corner him, which wasn't that often. He was busy and ignored me most of the time, but I knew if I bothered him enough, I would at least get a hint. He ignored you? Selena asked. He didn't love you? Like a son? He treated me like an infectious disease, flinching when I would touch his hand, turning the other direction when he'd see me in the hall. Jarren's fingers curled into fists. He'd thought he'd come to terms with his neglect as a child. Xander had come around, had come to love him as a son when he was older. Those memories shouldn't have been so painful for him, but everything came back, and he felt 8 years old again. But once, I caught him in his office just before he shut the door. I slipped in so he couldn't lock me out, and I climbed up onto his desk. He hated weakness, so I told him I would make a deal with him. If he told me one thing about you, I would leave him alone. I wouldn't interrupt his work, and he could pretend I didn't exist. Selena stepped fully out of the crumbling side of the washout. She stood close enough that Jarren could have reached out and touched her, but both of them stood with their arms straight at their sides. He was always a sucker for a good deal, she said, and a good sales pitch. They stood together under the sun that had lost its intensity in a moment of silence, caught in a reverie of a man they had loved but had burned them both. Jarren took a shaky breath. He shook my hand, like we'd signed a contract. Then he pulled out a tissue and wiped his fingers, like he needed to clean himself of my touch. He told me that you loved music and movies from the 1980s, that you used to sing in the car and bring up random quotes that no one recognized. He stopped, feeling like a piece of the mountain had gotten lodged in his throat. I tried to run away, but Rachel's mom stopped me at the bus stop. Xander had kept up his part of the bargain by telling me something, but nothing that would actually help me find you. So instead of finding you, I did everything 80s. I dressed 80s, and I watched every 80s movie, and I memorized every 80s song, so that when I did find you, There was another long pause. Selena's mouth opened once. She clasped her hands together and then pressed them to her thighs. The awkwardness pressed against Jarren until he couldn't handle it anymore. Move, I'm going to figure it out this time. Instead of stepping to the side, she stepped back, disappearing again into the dry ground of the southern Utah desert. It's showtime. Her words were a rumble of the earth, but they brought a smile to Jarren's face. She had even used the same voice inflection from Beetlejuice, a classic 80s movie. He could see himself stepping forward, shifting into the ground, becoming one with the earth, traveling effortlessly as the ground flowed in response to his will. It was meant to be. Instead of putting his hand out, he moved with confidence, like Selena, and walked right into a solid wall. He stumbled back. A small slide of dirt and rocks fell down the side of the bank and piled at his feet. Selena reappeared down the dry stream bed. Something is wrong with you. She strode toward him. I felt it when I was in the ground. Jarren rubbed his nose. He'd slammed it hard, trying to force his way to get what he wanted. That was how life worked, right? The harder you pushed, the more successful you would be. That's what Xander had taught him. He put 2 hands out and pressed them against the edge of the washout, pushing, trying to force his way in. He sensed the earth, sensed it calling out to him, but there was a black shroud between him and the light, something holding him back. He fought against the block in his mind, mentally focusing all his energy on breaking into the ground. He groaned against the pressure. When nothing changed, he let out a frustrated scream. The ground parted before him, ripping apart like the earthquake scene that had swallowed Jane's car in the 3rd Superman movie. He stood in front of a new crevice in the earth, perpendicular to the washout where they stood, almost a mile long. His vision blurred and he fell to one knee, nausea threatening to reject the water he'd been able to drink this morning. You are supposed to become one with the earth, not tear it apart. Selena stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the rift that had been carved into the desert floor. I'm sorry, Jarren said. I tried. An earthy scent filled his nose. The smell of decay and moist dirt and sagebrush calmed him. It was the smell of home, but the front door was locked. Something isn't right, she said. You are incomplete. Thanks for that. Jarren let a fear bubble up that he'd been considering. His dad had been part of the Triune for most of his life. Would he have done something to hurt him? Do you think Xander would let the Triune do something to me? Break me? If the Triune had gotten their hands on you, they wouldn't have let you go, she said. You've probably been alone too long. Suppress things when you were meant to be growing. Jarren would have choked if he hadn't already been trying to swallow his nausea. He had been alone his entire life. Then again, he had never been alone. After his mother left, and when his dad had pretended he didn't exist, he had Rachel. Xander, hiring Rachel's mother as his nanny, had been the saving grace of his life. She was his solace. Do you know if you have the ability to choose a guardian? Selena asked. What? Jarren didn't know where her train of thought had come from. When a descendant chooses their guardian, abilities are unlocked and shared. Many find their abilities magnified by connecting with another. Maybe it is time for you to choose a guardian. You think that's what's wrong with me? He asked. Is that what happened when you chose a guardian? Selena turned away and picked up the bag she had brought. I have never chosen a guardian. Why not? I am better on my own. You just said choosing a guardian would make me stronger. Jarren wanted to run after her, pull the bag from her shoulders, and beg her to stay. He wouldn't stoop that low. He wouldn't show the weakness inside of him. She was leaving? It was time for him to leave too. She turned back to look at him, her eyes shaded by her own forehead. The ground seemed to quiver beneath her feet. It magnifies your abilities. That's true. And you need that. Me? I am strong enough, as I am. How would you know if you never tried? Selena continued to walk, turning her head just enough to throw her last words over her shoulder. The man I asked to be my guardian refused, and I was already pregnant with his son.